Hear me?
Yep, I can hear you and I can see you.
Perfect. You can hear me and see me. Great. All right. Well, good. Thanks so much for everyone for joining today. As you know, I'm the Heritage Strides Curriculum Manager working with Oldways, a 501c3 nonprofit. And today we're doing one of our last Instagram lives for our Latin American Heritage Advisory Board Members Spotlight Series. Blech, that's a mouthful. But this is in celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. So right now we are having one of our few conversations. I'm so sad to see the series already done, but with Dr. Stephen Alvarez. Steve, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, hello everyone. I'm Stephen Alvarez, coming to you live from Astoria, Queens, New York. I apologize. Uh, there's some construction happening right outside my apartment because it is, but glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. And also, I can't hear a thing, so you sound great.
Oh, okay.
Well, perfect. So, just for a few pointers, like I said, Dr. Alvarez is one of our Latin American Heritage Advisory Board members, and this is for our Latin American and Health program. And we have a curriculum within there that's called A Taste of Latin American Heritage. He currently is working with St. John's College of Liberal Arts and Science. He is known for one of the courses that he offers called Taco Literacy. And he, does a lot of research and study on literacy and foodways of Mexican immigration and communities within it. And he also has published several books, poetry books, one that just came out recently.
Mhm.
And we'll be discussing more on, current initiatives and just ways that he likes to celebrate heritage. So let's get started. Are you ready, Steve?
I am ready.
Perfect. So, could you first tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in bringing food and nutrition into your career?
Well, it sort of came out of nowhere, to be honest. So I'm from Arizona, Mexican American, and I would just say that food was always part of what well, on one hand, sustained me, my family, but also sustained me culturally to be connected to my Mexican roots. But it was never something that came up in terms of my education. It was just something I always associated with home or being away from school sometimes. It wasn't until later on I went to university. Then, of course, I went to graduate school and I studied literacy, mostly with Mexican communities and how children were growing up bilingual and using their bilingualism to help their parents in different situations, but also how the parents were transmitting cultural values to the children so they could stay connected to their roots. Well, back then I was a starving graduate student, and the families I was helping kids with their homework would always bring me food. They bring me tamales, they bring me rice,
Ooh,
and it
nice.
was a beautiful gift. It was very touching. I was a starving graduate student, and I would
Mhm,
eat it, of course. But the food was also a way of the folks were saying thank you.
mhm.
They always wanted me to eat it in front of them too, so they could see me smile. It was a way of saying thank you and thank you for seeing us because you can see us and we see you. And this food is not just food, but it's we call confianza. It's trust, and it's built over time. Translates to confidence in English, but it has more resonance about something you build for community. Well, fast forward, got my PhD and I was wrote some books about literacy, but nothing with foodways. And I invited University of Kentucky, where I was a professor. We invited Gustavo Arellano, very famous taco expert, author of Taco
Mhm.
USA. He and I hit it off really well. He was impressed with the places I took him for tacos, and he got me involved with the Southern Foodways Alliance. And from there, it just became really interesting because I realized that food is never just about food, it's all about people. It's
Mhm.
about people first and foremost, and the stories that we tell and the ways we think about one another. So that food, I guess, unexpected branch in my career was something I wasn't ever planning for, but it also brought me back to my roots and the food that kept me sustained through my family. And now I can share it in academic ways, but also to a larger audience outside of academia as well.
That's so beautiful. And could you repeat that word again? The one that
Mhm.
is the Spanish word that you were
Sure.
saying that was mhm.
Yeah. Confianza. C-O-N.
Confianza.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Confianza. And when we say, like, for example, if
Mhm.
I don't know, you can say en confianza is when you
And
mean like I give this to
confianza.
you in trust. Yeah, but it's a very beautiful term, but it's also something to think about building community. And when thinking about those most memorable meals that we make, but also that we eat, is usually with the people we share those and making those memories with people, but also connected to the food. And for me, that's one of the most I don't know, touching ways to think about literally how food can go straight to your heart, but also as a way it brings us together, despite everything else that seems to try to tear us apart.
That's what I love about other languages, especially the Latin language. It's like there's really just beautiful words that don't translate into English language, where it just has such a deeper meaning that really embodies the feeling of food and togetherness. So that's a new vocab for all of us.
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
As far as thank you for also answering that question so well too. One thing that I was curious about is how do you see Mexican foodways influencing both local and global cultures, particularly through the lens of your taco literacy course? And also, could you give us a little insider of this course?
Mhm. Well, I guess maybe I can tell you just a little bit like where the
Mm-hmm,
genesis comes from, and it gives me the idea. So when I moved to Lexington, Kentucky, it was my first job professor,
mm-hmm.
University of Kentucky, and so there was a significant Mexican population there, primarily because of the agricultural industry, but also the horsing industry. And
Mm-hmm.
so the area near the horse track, where a lot of Mexican folks live, people would call that pejoratively Mexington. It was the Mexican
Oh,
barrio. But
oh.
there's a bilingual public library there, and there's a very vibrant area. But for me, it was a place that reminded me of like South Tucson and places I could recognize growing up. Also,
Mm-hmm.
people spoke Spanish and buy a quinceañera dress and all these kind of all the cool things that that we really
Got
love and
this.
also makes us feel good. It's a segregated part of the city.
Mm-hmm.
That segregation was, I guess you would say, Latinos or the newcomer group in the city that was already segregated. But at any rate, I guess when I was there at Kentucky, I was trying to teach a class called Mexington, Kentucky to
Mm-hmm.
undergraduates. And this was before 2016, but historically, immigration has always been a very difficult issue to broach in class because it's so polarized. And
Mm-hmm.
so, the class about Mexican Kentucky, I was getting a lot of resistance to students and asking questions like, why don't they go back and do things the right way for those who are undocumented and things like this. And it wasn't just, let's say, from white students, but it was also international students who had this kind of this reasoning. Well, anyway, it was a hard sell. I was inviting folks who were dreamers and people who were
Mm-hmm.
activists to class, but it was still very difficult I mean, even despite putting a face to the issue. Well, at the very end of the semester, I would take students to a field trip around the barrio, and we went to a place called Tortilleria Taqueria Ramirez. This is a place that they make their own tortillas. They use the same corn, very famous from Weisenberger Mills. They're the ones that make grits. So this is the same corn, except they're using it to make tortillas. Well, anyway, a lot of the students had only really ever been to places like Qdoba and some of the big
Yeah,
places,
yeah.
right? The
Taco
big players.
Bell.
Yeah, and so
Oh.
when they saw the menu and everything was in Spanish, they had so many questions. It's like, wow,
Mm,
what is cabeza? What is this? What is this? And then and when they got the food, all of a sudden they had all these questions about how do they make these tortillas? Wow, these are so good. And then that's
mm,
when I realized they were so curious about the food. If we go through the food, we can get to immigration, we can talk about exploitation, we can talk about migration patterns, and they're curious
mm,
and they want to know
mm,
more about the food, but also connected to my class is that you can't appreciate the food if you don't appreciate the people first, because the food is an expression of the genius, the history, the culture. And so the idea for taco
mm,
literacy is really more than just being able to say like knowing about different kinds of tacos. It's more about really understanding Mexican foodways broadly conceived, but knowing that, for example, the taco is sort of very emblematic and symbolic food, and so much so that's even an emoji, but it's a Taco
mhm,
Bell taco. That's a whole other story. And so anyway, that was the way that thinking about the class and how it originated, but also primarily thinking about literacy as practical knowledge. And so the way this is transmitted through foodways, be that through farming, be that through I don't know industry, be that just in everyday kitchens. And so to turn to the first part of the question about the local and the
mhm,
global, I tend to think of this also as a scale issue, thinking about the macro versus the micro, and how the macro always encroaches on micro experience at every
mhm,
level. And to think about like the food system and all our everyday encounters with the food system itself, or food systems, I should say. So on one hand, it's thinking about on the macro level things like global trade and how, for example, the North American Free Trade Agreement
yeah,
destabilized the corn economy of Mexico, and that led subsistence farmers to migrate to places like Kentucky or New York City, specifically from
mm,
the states of Puebla and Guerrero, Oaxaca, the Mixtec Valley. And so, it's really interesting because on one hand, there's the micro experience of like, I'm just going to try this food and understand it, and also even have one's personal preferences, and really thinking about one's direct connection to the food at the local level, personal level, and then of course expanding that to maybe one's community, what's available in one city. Where are one of the things I love to do with students is ask them where they're from, and then
Mhm.
look it up on Google Maps, and then type in taqueria and see what pops up and where they're from, so they can start to see, well, here's where the Spanish speakers are, because we use taqueria instead of tacos. You get different set of options,
Mhm.
and so this is also where they can start expanding and start thinking about, here are my neighbors here, and also they bring their own traditions that migrate and also renew what is Mexican food in the United States, because Mexican food has always consistently been innovating in Mexico, and those trends travel northward. But there's also trends that travel southward, I should say. And so, anyway, as I'm moving further and further, thinking about individual to community, maybe even region, different regions, of course, have different kind of foods, whether one's from the coast or from the mountains, for example, and then moving it on to
Mhm.
aspects of global trade. So, I'd say that it's about tacos, but it really, like I said, it's about thinking about people, culture, history, and increasingly more thinking about nutrition, which I think Oldways has got me really inspired to do more of that in my classes.
Nice. Thank you for that general overview. That was really fabulous. And also, if I was in college right now, I would definitely enroll in that class because it sounds like something that I learned in my undergrad in international relations, talking
Mhm.
about, foreign politics and that local to international nexus and how the global south and how we've interfered and how that affects our economy and, that influence. So that is so cool that you take that sort of perspective to introduce your students into, Latin American culture through cuisine, because food is a way that brings people together. So that's awesome. And also, is it too late to enroll? Are you offering,
No,
are you?
I got to take this thing on the road. The big hope is maybe someday we'll have Taco University, and then maybe that'll be the thing.
I'm picturing a whole, workshop series, even for adults.
Yeah, I
Past the
do.
students.
I've done stuff with foodways now, from kindergartners to people who are outside university, and it's just always the same idea of like getting to what is the practical knowledge, and also the really the genius of expression that comes through food. In the same way that music or poetry, it's just another way of thinking of something that is utterly human and humanizing and brings us together, but also sparks interesting conversations and really I consistently learn something new every time I get further into studying about Mexican food, and I've been living as a Mexican for many years now, and I can still learn new things, and which is always a beautiful thing for me because it helps me to learn more about myself, and also you know right some of the wrongs that I think that I've had experience as a Mexican American, making my way to where I am now as a professor. I mean, there's aspects of discrimination and other things like this, especially that my parents experienced. But like I said before, it was always the food that would sustain us, and my mom's food, and
Mhm.
people where you can taste the care. And sometimes there's those rough times, but there'll be and there will continue to be the rough times. But it is the aspect of food that which makes us, I think, culturally strong and also resilient.
Absolutely. And that actually goes into one of my questions. As just, as we're talking about like Latin heritage cuisine, the abundance of delicious dishes, diverse cultures, what are some ingredients to dishes that you grew up eating, and some that you can remember? I had another question that was connected back to taco literacy, so we may jump back to that after this question, but then we'll move forward. But yeah, what are some dishes that you grew up eating? Something that you remember, something that you like to prepare for your family?
Mm. Well, I mean, excuse me. I guess when I grew up in I grew up in southern Arizona, so
Mm-hmm.
Sonoran food. My mother's from Sonora, so that was the style of Mexican food I had. But it was also influenced by New Mexico, which was to the east of us,
Mm-hmm.
El Paso also to the east, and then of course California to the west. But I would say the big three that happened in my house every day, and I mean every day, was always pinto beans, oftentimes mashed, or my mom would just maybe prepare them. Rice, which was called Spanish rice, which was kind of
Mm-hmm.
rice with tomato sauce,
Yeah.
and always, always, always flour tortillas. Always flour tortillas. Northern Mexico is very famous for the flour tortillas, but corn tortillas were, the original. And then the flour is a variation with the flour that comes from the Spanish, and of course, making the tortilla as a flatbread. But
Mm-hmm.
I think some of my fondest memories. I must have been probably about 3 or 4 years old, is sitting across from my mom when she's making flour tortillas and she's patting out.
Mm.
She used to use Crisco. Traditionally, folks would use lard,
Mhm.
but Crisco is the healthier option. Not much healthier, but healthier. And of course, as
Yeah.
she would prepare them, she would have a big yellow plastic bowl, I remember, and she would make these little balls. And she
Mhm.
would often give me the ball so I would play with it and help her out. We fill up this big bowl. We put a towel over it, and one by one, she would roll them on a rolling pin. And then, of course, she would flip them on the comal or the griddle. And
Mhm.
she made these when they're very warm. She had some butter. And she would, not even just like cutting a piece of butter, but she would take the stick of butter and just rub it around and roll it up for me. And that was a tortilla with butter. And that was probably one of my favorite treats. I mean, so simple but delicious. That's I remember being about 3 or 4 years old and doing that with my mom. And I still think about that. And so tortillas,
Mm.
I have to have them all the time for everything. And sometimes my family sends me some from home. Um,
That's a
it's also one
treat.
of my favorite. They're not too difficult to make, and it's one of my favorite things to make. And it's also getting really good flour tortillas in New York. It's increasingly easier, but it hasn't always been an easy thing to do. But when you make your own, it
Really?
tastes better. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's so simple, but it's like when it comes out fresh like that. I've had fresh tortillas before, like especially I've had fresh flour tortillas, but fresh corn tortillas too. But it's like when it's so fresh and it's like you just get off the griddle,
Yeah.
it has enough flavor. Like it's like you can really just throw some butter on it and just eat it. It's like a snack. It's like a treat.
It's
That's
very
really nice.
versatile. I mean,
Oh
for
my
my
God, yeah, you
family,
could do everything.
yeah, for my family, growing up, peanut butter jelly burritos pretty common.
Oh, I
I mean,
love that.
I had, oh yeah, I mean, my brother would make just macaroni and cheese and wrap it up. I mean, stovetop stuffing. I mean, it was very
Everything with the
versatile.
tortillas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And oftentimes too, for like, especially when I would visit my grandparents, especially when my grandfather was cooking, he'd never give me a fork or a spoon. It was always a tortilla, and you just had to kind of like make
Mhm.
your way around the plate. But again, I guess maybe those are the fond memories for me. But in terms of Mexican food, a lot of the scholars will say that the bigger four, are going to be corn, squash, beans, and oftentimes we think of the Three Sisters farming method, but it's also done as a
Yep.
milk method in Mexico too.
Hmm.
I would add chili peppers, and the last thing I would say, connected to tortillas, where I grew up with the chili peppers, I grew up near the Hatch green chili, and so that's always
Ooh.
been, yeah,
Oh
that's
my
also,
gosh.
yes, that's always like my favorite thing going back, and I was just there recently last month, and folks were roasting them outside the supermarket, and buying 10-pound bags of green chili. I mean, it's a lot of green chili, but also that's one thing else that reminds me of home. And when I have that here, it takes me back to Arizona.
Look, you can always freeze it and have it for later. I am queen
That's
of the freezing produce and using
right.
it for later.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, that is really cool. Thanks for sharing some of your like favorite dishes growing up and hatch chili. To be from that region, what a treat. There's so many good like hatch chili. Like I just use that. I always keep some in the fridge. We always have it like when we're doing some salsas and pico.
Yeah.
Like it's just such a lovely flavor profile and it just really adds to everything you're making. So that I feel
I
like
would say,
that's one that I have to keep in some poblano peppers. Like
mm,
those are the two favorites. Some habanero. Oh,
ooh.
yeah. You're
There's,
making me hungry.
I'm telling you, right? What time was it? I can get some tacos.
But awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing that. Yeah, it really is nice when, this is a question that I love to ask with each of our advisory board members because it just brings up like a different memory. And also it's just very connecting because, even when you were talking about being from Arizona, we have another advisory board member who's also from Arizona. So that's really cool, just regional profile wise and having that interconnectedness even within our community.
Mhm.
So love to share that.
Great.
Um, what is going back to taco literacy,
Mhm.
the class that you offer? What's one of your like? I bet you've had a few because you've been. How long have you been teaching this class, Steve?
The first time I taught it was, let me see, I believe that was the spring of 2016. So it's gone through various iterations.
Oh yeah. So it's been a few years then. So this is going to be a more difficult question then.
Mhm.
It was just what's one of your most memorable student projects or assignments that have come from your course, where it's like, you offered this assignment or this project and students just completely understood it and it was just a real growth experience for you too as the instructor.
I think every semester there's just so many. There's been so many. So I'll kind of go
Right.
back and
Yeah.
really think. I'll think of. Let me see if I can give a maybe a couple from Kentucky, and then maybe one or two from New York. But when I first taught the class, first time I taught it, there were I think 16 students, and there were three Latinos. There were three Latinas
Hmm.
and one Latino. And so in that class, it was really interesting for them because they got to explore, learn more about the culture, their own culture, in addition with some of these other students. But oftentimes would be able to offer moments of expertise and be
Hmm.
able to share their experience with the entire class, and which was great. At
I
that
love
time, I
that.
was also the faculty advisor for Latino Student Union at University of Kentucky. So there was enough students. We had a Latino Student Union, which is great. I helped start it with the students there.
Hmm.
And so being the advisor, I was also a lot of Mexican American students there. And one of the final projects was I asked the students to pair them up. I got some volunteers in the student union to do some interviews with the class, except for the Latino students. I asked them to
Mm.
interview a family member or an elder. I had an experience where I interviewed my father as an undergrad about his labor history. He was a copper miner, and I just
Oh.
so much stuff that came up about his story, and it was just really
Hmm.
impactful for me. I wrote this essay about my dad. It only had to be about 10 pages, but I went about 30 because I just wanted to do a good job, and it was meaningful for me. And it was
Make it a
something I was,
capstone at that point. Yeah,
yeah, and
that's
it was
awesome though.
I wanted to share it with my family, and it
Yeah.
was one of those kind of essays where I kept it with me, and I still have that one. And so I was hoping that this was going to be a similar experience for these particular students to be able to talk to their family member
Hmm.
and bring them in their classroom. Well, one young woman, she interviewed her mother, and then while the process of interviewing the mother took her on it. Mother was preparing lengua, so she did a photo essay where she was going with her
Mm.
mom to buy lengua from the store and how to prepare it. And during this, there was a conversation where I think her mother said something about the contest she won. My daughter like, contest? What are you
Mm.
talking about? And so the mom came back with this newspaper clipping of a best mole competition she had won in town.
Ooh.
Um, but she didn't ever tell the family, or she didn't tell her daughter. Her daughter was away for that summer, and she said, "Mom, why didn't you
Aw.
ever tell me this?" Her
Mhm.
mom's like, "Well, you never asked." But it became an artifact for the text, and what's beautiful about it because it's written. This newspaper is a bilingual newspaper, so there's a Spanish part as well. And the mom mentioned something about that we live in a country where we want to teach our children our culture, but
Mhm.
the competition of fast food is something that's very present in every mother's mind, or something to the degree of this. But anyway, it's really beautiful because she got to write this essay, about her mom, and it was very touching, and her mom was the focus. And also, I might be the professor, but I think her mom is the real teacher in all of this, and anyone who is especially our elders and the women who literally carry the civilization on their back from grinding corn in the very beginning for what becomes Mexican people. And in addition to that class, there was another student of maybe I think yeah that class actually maybe a year no actually it was in the same class. He
Mhm.
wanted to compare fresh produce from Whole Foods and a local Mexican grocery store. So he was going to go compare prices and what was available. His question though for me was like, can I go to that grocery store where they let me in?
Of
Because I
course.
speak Spanish. And I'm like, yeah, especially if you bring money, they'll like you even better. And so
Yeah.
and so he was, he did go, and he actually made it from some friends. The guy who works
Oh.
produce started talking to him. He gave him some nopales, which are the cactus petals, taught him how to prepare them. But it ended up being like fresher and cheaper ingredients, or was at the Mexican store in his analysis, which was great. Um,
Mhm.
and then this was a somewhat more humorous one, though. But I had some students who were musicians here at St. John's, and so they were composing some taco songs, but they were also, going on some other traditions of thinking about the corrido tradition and how that's also been a genre of music that speaks back to power historically for northern Mexico. So, so many creative students. Many students who became more daring and want to do more cooking for their projects as well, and that's definitely something I really need to want to incorporate more for the future. So just every semester they always impress me. One of my classes were featured on the podcast called Sporkful, and so he followed us around the tour around around the city. And
Mhm.
when the host Dan Pashman was interviewing my students, they made me so proud. Wow,
Mm.
it was so cool. They were just sounded
That's
so smart. They said so. I knew they were listening. I knew they were learning.
and it's really nice to like contribute to that too because it's like some of these ideas, some of these stories they're getting from their family, but you're allowing that opportunity for them to not only start those conversations but embrace their heritage too in this academic setting. So I think that's really beautiful, and I think like it's you're probably watched that podcast and you're like, oh my goodness, like my students are so smart and brilliant, but it's like everyone needs that spark of inspiration or that, doorway, to even be open to enter,
Sure.
to get it started. And so I think, professors, teachers, instructors, they're awesome because they really have, the encouragement and the push to do that for their students. So
Yeah.
that's really
It
cool.
makes it more.
And I mean, oh, what were you saying?
Oh, I was just saying, you're exactly right. It makes it meaningful for me, and if it makes it meaningful for them, but also that, especially for so many students, students of color, particularly, to see
Mhm.
yourself centered in a class where everybody gains by studying about your culture, and then more importantly, where you can see connections with your life in the classroom, but hopefully take what you're learning in the classroom to help you read the world differently. There doesn't need to be walls between schools and the real world like there are in some cases, particularly not for foodways.
Exactly. And I love that you were talking about with one of your students that did the cost analysis of groceries when going to your local, Latin owned produce store versus, outsourcing other places, especially when you're looking for those specific ingredients for dishes. That's something that I feel like I'm always, reintroducing to new instructors when they're wanting to teach the Taste of Latin American Heritage curriculum that we offer
Mm.
is, like go to your local bodega, go to the neighborhood where you see the community because that is where you're going to find those spices and those ingredients. And I think it's
Mhm.
beautiful because it's a part of that introduction. You want to taste a taste of Latin American heritage, you have to go to those places
Mhm.
where there is representation.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
in
oh,
his essay, rightfully so, we're talking about chili peppers. And he was saying, I had never had any idea there were so many kinds of peppers, dried peppers, fresh
oh
peppers.
my
And he's like,
goodness,
you
yeah.
can't get that at Whole Foods, which is great. And I was like, yeah, you're right. These are the stars. And of course, like you're saying, there's different
Hmm.
kind of ingredients that may not be as readily available, but also will say things that are regional about the folks who are arriving. So I think in Kentucky, when pupusas started showing up, I'm like, "Look, the folks from El
Ooh.
Salvador are coming. That's cool."
Hmm. Yeah, no, that is so awesome. As far as like the course, I know you were talking about just you kind of add tidbits of wanting to add more of a nutrition emphasis or like even opportunities of cooking. I guess that was one of the follow-up questions is where do you see the course heading in the future? Any new topics or themes that you plan to incorporate?
Definitely. And I'm glad you asked that question because it really got me to think. Because every time I try to teach the class, I try to do something different, not just bringing in new text. That always
Hmm.
happens to be the case. Whatever might be more current and different kind of documentaries and stuff. We've gone through different things with using WordPress, Instagram. Haven't quite used TikTok yet. Maybe next time. But I've invited guests. We do field trips. Um, what I would like to be able to do, but unfortunately, my university doesn't have a culinary program, although we do have
Hmm.
dining services. And on one hand, what I'd like to be able to do is do some, cooking in class, maybe even something really easy like pico de gallo to get
Hmm.
started, but also show how easy it could be to start something like that. To be able to make tortillas with students, I think would be really great. I would say
That
the
would be
dining
really cool.
services. Um, there is programming because of course there's kitchens for
Hmm.
students on campus, dining facilities.
Hmm.
I will say most of the time I speak Spanish on campus or with folks who work in dining facilities. It's always very nice.
That was
And to be able to
my
highlight more of the
hmm.
Latino folks who are on campus who are also Mexican American, and to be able to ask them and also some of the folks who are doing the cooking to lead these classes while we're there together. The university, of course, I definitely think is open to it. I haven't made those relationships just yet, but I would love to
Hmm.
be able to do something where we could have some practical experience because I feel in the class right now we're getting a lot of the theoretical ways of thinking about the world. The practical is actually putting your hands and making something, which I
Hmm.
think is also something that, giving them the tools to be able to do this on their own and also maybe explore that hidden talent that maybe they didn't know. And
Hmm.
vice versa, when I think of literacy and just in general, there's the kind of the way I think of literacy and the way I've been using it in my work is there's the practical literacy, thinking about it every day, and then you can think about like the literacy or theories of literacy, theories of reading and writing, and there's another literacy which is praxis, which is theoretically informed practice. And I feel like we've been doing what I'd like to have is more of that praxis in the class so we can
Hmm.
read about it and then we can study. I would love, love, love to be able to do the process of nixtamalization with students, literally taking
Hmm.
corn and going
Hmm.
through that chemical process and then be able to grind that and then make that into and make corn tortillas. And the last thing I think that I'd really love to do is do a little bit of planting, maybe some chili peppers, and it gets
That would
students,
be fun.
beginning of the semester by the very end, and maybe we can have some fresh salsa, depending on where we can position things, because it's not so sunny here in the wintertime. But doing more
You have a
work
few
like
months.
this,
You can make it
yeah,
work.
we can make it work, I think. But hopefully be able to do something like this where we can really get to know a bit more about you know the actions, more of the processes, and really have students do that kind of learning, and directly hands-on, but also to make those relationships with people on campus who are sometimes not considered educators, but in this case, I think are probably some of the foremost experts when it comes to really thinking about this kind of knowledge.
Absolutely. And I mean, like, you're one of our advisory board members, so there's so many ways that we can, like, support you and, like, your things that you want to do. Like, we have a whole group of advisory board members, so if there's anyone within our Latin heritage that, you would love to connect with, I can always facilitate that connection. So maybe they could do, like, webinar, even if they're local, and visit in on one of your classes. So keep me in the
Yeah,
loop and we can definitely connect on that.
that
Yeah,
would be
that
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 would
could
be
be
great
really
fun.
cool.
Cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
and yeah, I think that would be great. And then also, gosh, there were like several light bulbs where you were talking. It was just really good ideas. So we've actually done old ways. When I say we, I'm like old ways, heritage diets, old ways.
Mhm.
We've done a presentation with a university's dining service
Mhm.
before. Like this, it wouldn't be the first time. So that is something that, like, I think if you connected, because who did I connect with? I think it was like the dining services program manager
Mhm.
that had reached out to me. And this was for Harvard University's dining service.
Mhm.
They reached out a couple years ago and wanted me to do a cooking demo for our African Heritage program during Black History Month. But there's definitely someone on the team at your university where you could probably facilitate that. And the way that it looked is essentially I did a cooking demonstration from the curriculum and then talked about its historic significance
Yeah.
and its connection to African heritage foodways.
Mhm.
So I bet if you brought that up to the program coordinator director at through your dining services,
Mhm.
maybe they could get something started, especially during like a celebration too. Like, I mean, Hispanic Heritage Month is over in like a couple of days. We have a few more days, sadly. But like, I mean, what better way to like engage with, students within an academic setting, but also in a university setting where it's also
Mhm.
celebrating Latin American heritage, you know, traditions, culture, heritage in general. So, yeah, if you ever have any questions on, ways that we've been able to do that
Mhm.
and, just brainstorming or whatnot, feel free to reach me anytime because I want to definitely be always a point person for our advisory
Sure.
board members for the Latin Heritage and African Heritage Diet. So I'm just going to throw that in there before I forget later.
Oh, I appreciate that. And like I said, it was thinking about old ways that got me to really start thinking, I wonder if I could do this and really start thinking about dining services. You already have done it, but it also gives me an idea that it's possible. And I definitely
Yeah.
feel like it's an aspect of a Catholic Vincentian university. And so getting outside the classroom is something that the university really likes to emphasize. And I feel like for students, it would
Mhm.
be what a special treat. And also to find out, to be able to talk with people and to learn a little bit about how they got where they are and learn
Mhm.
about this kind of culinary world that maybe is not necessarily part of the curriculum, but exposing it, that's a possibility in that respect as well.
Absolutely. And I feel like at Oldways, like, something that like is very underplayed, but we definitely are a place of like connections and bringing people together. Chefs, RDs, cookbook authors,
Yeah.
everyone within this food space and connecting together. And I think it's really cool um, hearing about like current initiatives that you guys are working on because it keeps me in the loop of like when you said Southern Food Alliance, I was like, oh, Tony Tipton Martin, that's one of our
Of course.
advisory boards with our African Heritage Diet who works a lot with this. So
Mm.
it's just like connections, like we're all interconnected in ways, especially within the food scene, and
Mhm.
so it's just really cool. But I know we've chatted about
Mhm.
this. Tell us about the poetry book that just came out. Tell us about your latest project outside of the classroom that you like to do just during your own time.
Oh, well, I have a book of poetry. This is my fourth book of poetry.
Hmm.
Let's see. My first one came out in 2017. Then I had another one in 2021. 2022 and 2024. So I've been publishing a lot of these books, but these were books of stuff that I've written probably about 15 or 20 years ago. They're just barely
Wow.
coming out. Um,
Hmm.
I write sort of a very experimental style, so a lot of the stuff I was sending a lot of years of rejections. But in 2017, I won an award, and it kind of got me a little bit more visibility, and it helped me be able to keep working on this project, which was somewhere like around 1,000 pages. So I divided up into four
Wow.
different groups. So this book is called Tonala Matl, El
Hmm.
Segundo's Dream Notes. Tonala Matl is Nahuatl, or Aztec language word, but it's also a kind of a reckoning of days or a book of calendars. I was also thinking about like prophecy related to this. So I take
Hmm.
that name and applied it to this book because it's about a character's dream notebook from the past who's dreaming about ancestors in the future. All four of these novels in verse, really. Sorry about people doing some work out there. These novels in
Oh no.
verse focus on the borderlands and a family's experience moving from Mexico to the United States. And so in that, there's also elements of dream, mythology. I was also inspired way back when by James Joyce and his novel Ulysses, where it was a day in the life of an everyday person, but it was always connected back to you know uh, Greek mythology. I was hoping to do something like that with the character, but instead of like turning to Greek Mesoamerican mythology, so how the everyday also has resonances with the past and colonial history and conquest. And so this book is more narrative driven, telling about
Hmm.
some brothers and a series of letters and a kind of a love triangle. So this one
Oh.
is a little more story. Yeah, yeah,
We
brothers
love a
and
love triangle.
yeah, yeah. So this one, is kind of interesting. You're right, but some of it's somewhat based on some family history, but not necessarily. And then other stuff is about like just different things I've read about mythology and culture. And so um, it's been a really fun treat to write. Like I said, though, this is stuff I've written maybe about 15 years ago. So the
Wow.
stuff I'm writing now is much more about climate change and,
Hmm.
dystopia and speculative kind of poetics. So things keep moving.
Hmm.
Those will probably not be out for another 10 years. Who knows? But it's always been
Hopefully
fun. And
sooner.
I would say likewise what I mentioned before about how food was something that really sustained me during some times where I felt really challenged, especially through school.
Hmm.
Poetry's always been that too. Even despite all
Yeah.
the rejections and things, it's just always never stopped writing. It's just something I've loved, and it's something I love to teach. And I think for me, it's been something that I don't know. I think when I really decided I wanted to be an English major is because I really fell in love with literature. And the same way, I fell in love with thinking about Mexican food. So poetry and
Hmm.
Mexican food to me are synonymous.
No, that's awesome. I love the idea of, just having hobbies and things outside of your work where it's like you could also get a sense of um where it's just like expression of creativity and things that you really enjoy, like poetry, writing, literacy. That makes sense because you work with the College of Liberal Arts at St. John, so it's like,
Mhm.
okay, like there's another passion here, and I think that's really cool that it's something that you're just continuously working on. And I think through this lens of folklore, like Latin
Mhm.
folklore, it's not like you read a lot of books on that. It's not like it's not like there's um it's not like it's really something that you hear about a lot. So it's a really unique perspective. And I feel like that's something that during my free time when it comes to reading novels and stuff, I love a good historic fiction,
Yeah.
where it's like, maybe it's talking about, some really grim things that happen in history, but there's that little bit of fiction into it that gives just like that feeling of hope.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
uh, yeah, I think it's something that it's I think we need more of that.
I think we're really advocating for the humanities here. It
Hmm.
really is true that where there are drastic cuts happening at universities all around the country,
Yeah.
oftentimes it comes at the expense of the humanities and that form of education, maybe because it may not be cost effective or I don't know, it doesn't have some of the lucrative rewards down the line. I'm not say guaranteed, but you might find in maybe more tech stuff, for example. But the
Hmm.
humanities are what, as a study of us, what makes us human, good and bad. And so finding that in history, the studies of languages, it's to me, bringing foodways into that picture. I think that's also one of the crux of humanities if we're really thinking about it. And so for me, it's been always a treat to find another way to think about cultural expressions, but that
Hmm.
have a legacy and that can also ground us to larger traditions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for just sharing. And also, um, wait, could you say the name of the book again and where we can find it? Just, I know we've got this blog post and we've tagged you, but still, just let us know.
Sure, yeah, the book is called Tonala Mato, El Segundo's Dream Notes. I believe on my bio here on Taco Literacy, you can go to the link tree. And there's also some of my other
Cool.
books and different articles. And I was on a show on Netflix and another on Hulu, so there's some clips there.
Whoa.
And talking about, just did an interview about birria, I think last week for CNBC. So all kinds of cool stuff about taco. If you can't get enough taco literacy here, there's more stuff there you can find, and also a link to all these books.
Absolutely. And I'll be, for people interested in hearing more from Dr. Alvarez, I'll be tagging him, when I post this up on the feed too. So feel free to go to his account and learn more about current projects, initiatives, and we'll be keeping in the loop too.
All right.
Um, well, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And it's been awesome just being able to connect with another Latin American Heritage Advisory Board member, especially during Hispanic Heritage Month. I know you guys are busy, and we really appreciate just having, a moment of your time to connect, promote some work, and, talk more, have more of these really intriguing discussions about foodways that celebrate heritage. So this has been fabulous. My last, I guess, question, I know that this is, obviously what you're doing for Hispanic Heritage Month is chatting with us, but is there anything else that you would like to share or something that you have done or plan to do in celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month, or even an upcoming, workshop that you have going on that you'd like to plug in before we end our call?
Well, my this book I just mentioned, it was
Mm-hmm.
or the publication date was September 16. That's a
Oh,
Mexican
that's
Independence Day,
so recent.
right at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of Hispanic Heritage Month. So one thing I really love doing here in New York City is going to Manhattan. This year it was a little bit earlier than September 16. I believe it was the 15th,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a parade that was happening down the street, and
I
so
heard
many people,
about
families.
this. Yes.
It's so beautiful. It's
Mm-hmm.
always one of the highlights of the year for me. It's usually a nice sunny day, and just seeing every year it just gets bigger and bigger, and just
That's
so
cool.
beautiful and touching, and also seeing people happy and proud and all
Mm-hmm.
those smiles, and also seeing people with their Mexican flags and American flags together, and
Mm-hmm.
that's always a highlight and a treat for me here in New York City, because the Mexican population relatively new compared to other parts of the country, but very vibrant and increasingly becoming a stronger part of the fabric of the city.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, oh my gosh, that sounds awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Steve. It's been really good, and I will definitely tag you. We'll keep in contact. Everyone, thanks so much for joining. I appreciate your attendance, and this will be saved on our profile, so you can always watch it anytime. But this is the end of our IG Live series for Hispanic Heritage Month. Ah, but I'm excited for next year's, and we'll keep these conversations going throughout the year too, because yes, there's a month designated towards it, but we have our programs. These are conversations that will continue to go on throughout the year, and it's important. So, we want to keep it alive and keep offering these discussions. And occasionally we'll do webinars. We'll have new recipes on the site. So feel free to stay in tune with Oldways Heritage Diets and just Oldways, as we're all the same. And, Steve will definitely keep in contact. And if there's anything you want us to share, please don't be a stranger. This has been great. And thank you all so much for your time.
Right, thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
All right. Bye.
Bye bye.